Welcome to Lesson 11, where we'll be talking all about flour. We'll cover traditional uses of flours, but also cover gluten-free flours. While celiac disease isn't common, chances are you may know someone who does have celiac and therefore requires a gluten-free option in the kitchen. For this reason, we will cover alternative flours used for gluten-free diets. Let's get started. In this lesson, we will start by reviewing the objectives, and then we'll cover our nutrition and culinary lessons before you complete a knowledge check to ensure learning goals are being met. You'll then be able to watch the cooking demos that will bring to life what you've learned in this lesson. We'll then wrap up this lesson by setting some goals. Here are the objectives for today's lesson. We hope that you will demonstrate the knowledge of a variety of baking flours for use in savory and sweet recipes. Use a variety of baking flours to prepare healthy recipes. Apply knowledge of nutrient composition to the selection of flours for different recipes. And apply cooking techniques to the preparation of recipes containing different flours. Before we discuss processing flour or the differences in flours and how each is used, let's revisit the anatomy of the whole grain as it's important to this conversation. These same principles of selecting whole grains that we discussed in Lesson 4 will apply here when you're selecting your flours. Remember that the germ, endosperm, there is a germ, endosperm, and bran. Most of the fiber and nutrients can be found in the bran and germ. Flour is made by grinding raw grains, tubers, beans, nuts, or seeds. The method you see here is an ancient method of grinding grains with stones to produce a flour. Modern millers do not just grind grains this way, as it doesn't allow for the different parts of the grain to be separated. Modern milling uses a series of machines to remove and separate all parts of the grain and process them separately. Sometimes they are reintroduced together, as in whole grain flour, and other times they remain separated, as in processed flours. Flours also can be bleached unnaturally white, so you may see some white flours noted as unbleached white flour. Each flour has its own nutrition profile. Let's take a look at the calories, protein, and fiber of some of the popular types of flour. Note, white flour is 120 calories, 4 grams of protein, and 1 gram of fiber, versus the whole wheat flour has 140 calories, 6 grams of protein, and 5 grams of fiber. Remember, fiber, protein, and fat help us control our blood sugar, and they also make us feel full following a meal. You may notice on this chart, coconut flour has 120 calories, 6 grams protein, and 10 grams fiber. That's double the amount of fiber in any flour out there. Coconut flour does not contain gluten though, so we will need to learn how to use it properly in recipes. On this slide, we've highlighted the conventional flours, and so these are the ones that have gluten. And spelt is related to wheat here. And these are the less conventional flours that are made from nuts, seeds, and roots. Unless you have celiac disease or a diagnosed intolerance, you don't need to be avoiding gluten. The other flours can be fun to cook with and experiment with, but they are not enriched like wheat flour is. And many times these are more expensive. Let's just talk about a couple of them here. Cassava flour is flour made from the entire cassava root vegetable, whereas tapioca flour, also known as tapioca starch, is just a starch from the cassava root. These flours and combinations of them, like I said, are used in gluten-free cooking. Now let's get into the culinary lesson. The primary difference in flours is their protein content. White flour versus whole wheat or whole grain. White flour is just the endosperm is milled. Remember, the endosperm is where the starch is. Whole wheat flour is so there's no protein basically in white flour. Whole wheat flour has varying amounts of germ and bran added back. Including germ and bran adds not just protein and fiber, but all those extra nutrients as well, such as vitamins and minerals. Next, we have hard wheat versus soft wheat. Flour made from high protein wheat varieties, which have 10 to 14% of their protein content, is called hard wheat. Flour made from low protein wheat varieties, which have 5 to 10% protein content, is called a soft wheat. Basically, more protein equals more gluten, as gluten is a protein. So more protein will yield a tougher product with more elasticity. These characteristics are desirable in some recipes, like for bread, while not so desirable in others, such as cakes. All-purpose flour is a mix of soft and hard wheat, truly all-purpose. It's the most versatile flour out there. You can use it making cookies, muffins, breads, as well as pasta. Whole wheat flour is a high protein, but it doesn't form gluten as well as an all-purpose bread flour because of the germ and the bran. Sometimes you can replace 100% of all-purpose flour with whole wheat, but often best replace starting at about 1/3 of the all-purpose flour with your whole wheat flour, especially with recipes such as homemade pasta that need all-purpose for texture. It can still be used for cookies, muffins, pancakes, and pizza dough. Personally, I have found that I have a pancake recipe that half of my flour as whole wheat works just as well, and as like it's better than 1/3 of the flour. Well, white whole wheat flour is made from hard white wheat, similar nutrition profile as the whole wheat flour, but it's sweeter and more similar in taste to the all-purpose flour. Next, let's talk about cake flour. Cake has the lowest protein content, lowest amount of gluten. So it's ideal for softer baked goods such as cakes, muffins, and sponge cake. Pastry flour is a blend it's a kind of halfway between an all-purpose and a cake flour. And this is great for pie crusts, tarts, and cookies. Next, we have bread flour. This is milled from entirely hard wheat, highest protein content. It's ideal for breads, pizza, baked goods that kind of have that more chew to them. Sorry. Now, double O flour is an Italian style flour. It's made from the hardest type of wheat. It's medium protein content and it's super fine texture, making it easy to roll out for pasta or crackers. Next, we have legume or nut flours. These are gluten-free and contain a varying amount of protein and fat contents. And it may need more of a rising agent to accommodate the fact that it's a heavier flour. Gluten-free flour is often made from rice flour, corn, potato, sorghum, tapioca, and others, and can sometimes be replaced in a 1-to-1 ratio for all-purpose flour. But you may need xanthan gum to mimic chewiness of gluten-containing flours. Also remember, gluten-free flour is usually not enriched and may lack nutrients that are found in wheat flour. A few things to consider with gluten-free baking. Mixing. Well, first of all, when you mix a conventional flour, remember it's usually don't over mix your batter. You've heard that before, right? One mistake people make when preparing gluten-free baked goods is not mixing enough. So again, we typically guard against overmixing with traditional flours, but with gluten-free flour blends, there is no gluten to overdevelop. And so with gluten-free batters, however, extra mixing can yield a more balanced baked good that rises properly and has that nice spongy texture. Just remember when gluten overdevelops, you get that rubbery texture. Now let's talk about leavening agents. These provide lift and spreading of your baked goods. We will cover 3 leavening agents in this lesson: baking soda, baking powder, and yeast. Baking soda is an alkaline. When baking soda comes in contact with acidic ingredients such as buttermilk, vinegar, or citrus juice, it is activated to expand. Remember and think about those volcanoes from grade school? That's what's happening here. This gives lift to your baked goods. For example, you may note that a recipe has both baking soda and buttermilk, such as pancakes, or baking soda and cider vinegar, such as some cake recipes. The acid plus the baking soda cause that reaction that creates a gas and therefore lift to your product. In the absence of acid, baking soda will assist in the spreading of the baked good, as in cookies, for a less cake-like texture. Baking powder is both alkaline and acidic, so it provides lift to baked goods like muffins and cakes. When using baking powder, often the addition of baking soda is not necessary. If a recipe calls for both, it may mean a few things. 1, there's not enough acid in the recipe to support the baking soda and its leavening, or the recipe developer wanted to enhance the browning of the final product, or they wanted to add an extra tanginess that might be called for in the recipe. While we're not be preparing any yeast recipes in this program, it's important for you to know how it works as a leavening agent. Yeast is a living bacteria that comes in 2 forms, active and dry. Active yeast must be stored in the refrigerator. Dry yeast can be stored in a cool, dry place such as your pantry. When mixing with warm water, yeast is activated and begins growing, generating gas, which in turn causes your baked goods to rise. Typically, a recipe will call for yeast to be pre-mixed with warm water to activate before adding to other ingredients. Although you can purchase rapid rise yeast, which does not require this step. A note about gluten-free baking. In the absence of gluten, baked goods rely heavily on leavening agents and stabilizers, which we'll talk about here shortly. Allowing your batters to rest a bit before baking or cooking can give the leavening agents time to develop and give more rise in your gluten-free products. For example, when making gluten-free pancakes, let the batter sit for about 10 minutes. All right, let's talk about stabilizers. Stabilizers are more important for gluten-free baking than for conventional baking. When cooking with conventional wheat flour, the gluten provides that stability. For example, when baking bread, you develop the gluten through kneading. As the bread rises, it is stabilized by the network of gluten proteins. For gluten-free products, you don't have the built-in support structure, so stabilizers are necessary to get a product that resembles a conventionally baked good. Stabilizers include guar gum. This is a fiber from the seed of a guar plant. It's high in soluble fiber and low in calories. Sounds scary, but it's not. Now you know if you see it in ingredient lists in products on the market. Guar gum adds structure or glue to baked goods as a way to prevent a crumbly texture. It has 8 times the thickening power of cornstarch. Xanthan gum. This is similar to guar gum. Xanthan gum helps prevent crumbling in baked goods by providing structure and strengthening elastic networks. Xanthan gum is derived from sugar. The sugar can come from many different places, including wheat, corn, soy, and dairy. So, people with severe allergies to these products may need to avoid foods containing xanthan gum unless they can determine what source that xanthan gum came from. Otherwise, again, there's no reason to be afraid of xanthan gum. Sounds scary, it's not. Psyllium husk is a form of fiber made from the husks of the Plantago ovata plant seeds. It acts as both a thickener and stabilizer for baked goods. Psyllium holds many times its weight in water and provides exceptional stability to baked goods. You can replace eggs with psyllium husks very easily in recipes that don't depend on other properties from the egg, such as an angel food cake or flan. Psyllium husk is also commonly known as a laxative, and it is used as a base for many laxative products. Starches can also act as stabilizers for baked goods. Some common starches used in bake and breading include arrowroot powder. This is flavorous, similar to cornstarch, and it's a great substitute for those who avoid corn. Use it to thicken sauces or pie filling. Substitute 2 teaspoons for every 1 tablespoon of cornstarch. Potato starch. This has a similar texture to cornstarch and tapioca starch, but it's derived from white potatoes. This helps bind recipes together and keep baked goods tender. Tapioca starch. This is also known as tapioca flour, and it's used as a thickening agent. It also provides that chew and elasticity. It can also contribute to browning. Lastly, we're going to cover mixing techniques used with different flours to yield different outcomes. First, we have the muffin method. Dry ingredients are sifted together, liquid ingredients are mixed together, and then wet is added to a well in the middle of the dry ingredients and mixed just to combine. Again, over-mixing develops too much of the gluten. You may notice as you get to the end of your muffin batter, those muffins have uneven, puffy tops. This is because the leftover batter was handled too much, or more than it was at the beginning. The biscuit method, like the muffin method, but cold butter is cut into the dry ingredients to form a crumble. So as it bakes, the steam rises out of the butter and helps to create those flaky layers. And so you are adding the butter to the dry before you add the liquid to the dry. Then we have the creaming method. The goal of this method is to aerate the fat, such as butter. The sugar crystals are cut into the butter, making it light and fluffy. You then add eggs and flavoring extract, whisk it together, and then gradually add your dry, alternating with milk, for example, with a liquid such as milk. This method incorporates more air, makes light and fluffy cakes. When used with cookies, it creates that chewy center and crispy outer edge. The straight method is the simplest of all methods, and it requires that everything is dumped into a bowl and mixed. The straight method can be used with breads that do not require fermentation, such as your flatbreads. It can also be used for quick breads, such as zucchini bread, pancakes, and waffles. Finally, we have kneading. Kneading is important to recipes that require gluten protein to develop. Gluten is made up of 2 proteins, and the kneading helps bring them together to provide structure and elasticity. It is used best for pasta, pizza, and bread doughs. All right, we have come to our knowledge check for today. Let's review some of the things that we've talked about today. I know it was a lot. What are 2 types of flours typically used in baking? Again, there are so many to choose from here, but all-purpose flour, wheat flour, cake flour, pastry flour, bread flour, nut flours, and gluten-free flour. Which flour has the most protein? Whole wheat conventional flour and some of your nut flours, such as the coconut that we mentioned. Good. What is the role of gluten in baking recipes? Gluten provides that elasticity. and 1 or 2 mixing techniques that bring baking ingredients together. We just discussed them. We had the muffin method, kneading for bread. We had the biscuit method, the creaming method, and the straight method. Once you've completed your knowledge check, let's take a look at the resources available to you to bring all this information together. These resources will support you in bringing to life what you've learned in this lesson in your own kitchen. Resources include cooking videos, handouts, recipes, and of course, your chat with the dietitian community. Once you've completed your knowledge check and reviewed all of the resources, it's time to set some SMART goals. SMART goals are specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound. An example of a SMART goal for this lesson might be, by the end of this month, I'm going to experiment with whole wheat flour in my favorite baking recipe. All right, let's get cooking.